You're about to see the top 7 of the most spectacular games, moves and results in the entire history of chess. But before we move to it, let me first officially announce the winners of the recent giveaway. Recently, the YouTube channel of the Remote Chess Academy has crossed 50,000 subscribers, and I wanted to thank you for that, and that's why we had this giveaway, where everyone could win a nice prize. Now the winners were determined randomly by the software. All the winners were contacted through the comments, also were announced in our social media. You can check out all the details in the description. And if you did not win the prize, I hope that you don't get discouraged. I actually have seen so much of an interesting and insightful comments here, including some of the messages from my old friends, that I really wanted to thank everyone. And that's why, in order to thank everyone, I decided to provide an additional gift to you, which is a $35 coupon that you may use in our shop. It's gonna be valid for the next 3 days only, so please make use of it soon. Once again, thank you guys so much for your support, and now let's get back to the lesson. Here's our first example, the game between Torre and Parker. In this position, White actually resigned, even though, funnily enough, he resigned in a winning position. White player thought that there is no defense against Rook c1 following by the promotion of this passed pawn on the d2. However, there is actually a really brilliant way for White not only to stop this threat, but actually to win the game. You may think about it for a few seconds yourself, or even pause the video because the move is really difficult. But nevertheless, there is a shocking way for White to win. Instead of resigning, White could have and should have played Rook to d6. The point is, it interferes the work of this Black's Rook along the d file, and therefore prevents this Rook from supporting the pawn on d2. And now Black has a choice, but it's actually, either option is bad. In case Black captures with the pawn, let's start from this option, which is the simplest. Now this Rook does not support the pawn on d2, and therefore White can just go ahead and push his pawn forward and then promote a couple of new queens even. Notice that this pawn is going to be captured easily by the White's king, therefore it's not dangerous anymore. Let's take a move back and see what can happen in case Black captures by the Rook. In this case, White certainly can promote the queen right away, and he is winning again because of an extra queen. For example, just one possible line if Black decides to cover the king by the Rook. The easiest way for White is just to sacrifice the queen and then promote a new one on the next move, and Black is obviously defenseless. Really cool game and absolutely amazing move, Rook to d6 in the starting position of this example. Let's go back there. Instead of resigning, White could have played Rook d6. What a shocker, what a great example. The next position is from the game between Mamedyarov and Nakamura. Mamedyarov is White, Nakamura is playing Black. Obviously, these two folks are some of the top players in the world, and just to make it clear, the White pawn is moving forward, the Black pawn is moving, in this case, in the downward direction. So the position is equal, the material is equal, and almost all the pieces were already exchanged. Therefore, naturally, almost any reasonable move for Black would lead to a draw. For example, some of the easiest way to force the draw right away is just to promote the new queen to deflect the Rook, and once the Rook captures the queen, Black recaptures the White's pawn, and it's a dead draw. It's time to agree. But at this point, Nakamura decided to have a little bit of fun, and he certainly thought it's not going to make any difference, and he promoted his pawn into a knight. He certainly thought that White would capture it anyways, and that would lead to a draw, while allowing Nakamura an unique chance to promote your pawn into a knight. But all of a sudden, it turned out to be a losing mistake. Instead of capturing the knight right away, Mamedyarov did a tricky intermediate check, Rook f2. And all of a sudden, Black is somewhat in trouble. The natural way for Black would be to try to move his king towards the White's pawn in order to capture it. But if Black plays king to g3, instead of capturing the knight right away, White can first play Rook f3 check and trade off the rooks. Black goes somewhere, White trade off the rooks, and only then would White capture the knight, and now Black is obviously defenseless against the White's pawn moving forward and promoted into a new queen. So let's come back to this position. At this point in the actual game, Nakamura probably realized the deadly mistake he made here, and instead of moving king g3, which doesn't work as we just have seen, he played king g1, but now Mamedyarov took the knight. After black goes to g2, white made once again this intermediate check, pushing black's king away, because just like we have seen before, the king can't go forward because white would play rook f3 and would trade off the rooks. So the king was pushed back, and then white played rook to f5 to protect his extra pawn, and he actually ultimately won the game. To be completely honest, it's still a draw, and black could have achieved a draw here, but probably Nakamura was so shocked that somehow he turned this dead draw position into a somewhat dangerous one that he lost this game really badly. If you want to see the actual game, you can download it in PGN format. You can find the link down below in the description, and let's move on to the next example. It's a game from the World Championship match between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. Carlsen was playing white, and he just played king to d2 at this point. And here it turned out that this move is actually a bad blunder, which could cost Carlsen a score in this game, and who knows, maybe even in the entire match. At this point, Anand did not notice the lucky opportunity he had. He just played pawn to a4, which doesn't make a big difference. But you may decide to pause the video and try to find the combination yourself. The combination that was overlooked, funnily enough, both by Carlsen and Anand. In fact, black could have captured the white's pawn on e5 here, using the fact that the white's rook is now under the attack of the black's rook, and therefore white has to do something about this rook, for example to capture the black's rook on g8. And here comes the trick. Instead of recapturing the rook right away, which would lose the knight, black has the intermediate check, knight takes c4. Not only this is an intermediate check, it also grabs the pawn, and therefore that's a way for black to capture the rook back on the next move, but also to win a pawn along the way. White cannot capture the knight by the king as well, because if he tries doing this, the knight has one more intermediate check, and the way to escape, which is knight to b2 check, the king has to go back finally, and then rook takes g8. Currently black just won two pawns actually. He picked up the pawn on e5 and then the pawn on c4, and sure enough, in the World Championship match, this is a winning advantage. Black certainly would be able to convert this game into a win, and actually at this point, it was the sixth game of the match. The score was still even, and if Anand won this game, who knows, maybe he would have been able to even win the entire match. So, a very annoying blunder, and it's also quite interesting that both these top-level players missed this relatively simple tactics. Here's the next example, the game between Samarin and Antoshin. The white player, I guess, is an international master, the black player is a grandmaster. He was a member of the former USSR Olympic team, so he's a really strong guy, and at this point he decided that he can win the game with a beautiful combination. He sacrificed his queen by playing queen takes h2. And the idea behind this move is that after white recaptures, black plays rook to g8, and now he's gonna just checkmate white after rook to h5. In this position, white just resigned. He probably was shocked by this queen sacrifice, and he certainly thought that the sacrifice of a queen made by a grandmaster should lead to a win, and he just resigned. Even though, surprisingly, he had a way not only to escape, but to win the game. The trick here is that, currently white can't cover the h-file by the queen, going queen to h3, because this square is controlled by the bishop. And also there is no way for white to stop this rook h5 move from coming, but there is a way for white to actually achieve these goals. He can play, first of all, pawn to e6 to clear the fifth rank, and also temporarily block the way of this bishop. And once the pawn is captured, he can now take rook takes c5. White certainly can sacrifice a rook because he's up a queen, and therefore after this rook takes c5 and then after black recaptures, white just prevents this rook h5 checkmate from coming, and at the end of the line he'll be with the rook versus the black's queen, and therefore it's a clear win for white. A really cool example of white resigning in a winning position, and a good lesson for us that when a stronger player who is playing against you is playing a move, do not assume that it's necessarily a good one. It could be a terrible blunder, and always check your opponent, do not trust his calculation. Alright, the next game is between Morozevich and Igor Kiev, two very strong grandmasters. In this position it was white to play, and white took queen takes d4. What could be more natural than this? However, it turns out to be a decisive losing mistake. In this position, black actually did not take advantage of his chance. He played queen to c7 and the game drawn after a few next moves, but there was a winning combination that black could use instead. You may try to find the combination by yourself. A little hint, whenever you seek for a combination, look for forcing moves, jacks, captures, attacking moves. It makes your task way easier. In this position, black could have and should have played rook to c1. And now, white can't take with the rook because in this case, he will lose the queen to d4. Therefore, the only thing white could do is to capture by the king. But in this case, black can play queen c7 check, and then he can chase the white's king with checks, and on the next move, queen a2 checkmate. A pretty interesting turnaround could have happened in this game in a similarly, drawish position. Black could have won it out of nothing, with this really spectacular move. I'm sure Morozevich would had a couple of sleepless nights after that, but lucky for him, black didn't find this in a real game. Game number 6 between Korchnoi and Giri. It's white to play. The position is relatively equal. Maybe white has a little bit of pressure, but there is nothing decisive. And at this point, Korchnoi decided that he has a winning combo. He played rook to g6. And at this point, black just resigned. He certainly calculated the line pawn takes g6, queen takes h6 checkmate, using the pin thanks to the white's bishop on e5. But interestingly, here black could have won this game. Instead of resigning, he just needed to calculate a couple lines. And as we have already discussed, it's always useful to calculate forcing moves, which are checks, captures, and attacking moves. And in this position, black should have took this the bishop on e5. White certainly would try to grab the queen, and in this position, black can take the bishop on d3, and which is really important. He's ready to jump with his knight to f4, attacking all of the white's pieces at the same time, which is going to be a fork. Because of this threat, there is no time for white to save his rook from e6, and black would grab it on the next move, and he would have a rook and two knights versus the white's queen, which gives black a decisive material advantage, if white would do anything. By the way, notice that white can't checkmate black by rook takes h6, because in this case, after pawn takes h6, there is no time for white to capture the pawn because the white's king is under a check. Quite interesting example, and certainly another reminder for us. Don't give up too soon. Anything can happen, and especially when you play blitz online, especially when your opponent is not so experienced. But in these examples, actually we can see that even grandmasters and world champs can make these oversights and blunders. But especially if your opponent is not that much experienced, keep playing, there is always a chance.